Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very pleased to announce that we have a special guest, David Delgado, who is joining us today. David is our Certification and Applications Department Manager. David, can you tell us a little bit about your department and your staff?
Yes. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. This is pretty much a new department that was put together due to the needs and expansion of the company. The Applications Department has been around for about 3 years since I joined the company, and the Certification Department, which is a lot of the UL, FTC, DOE, lighting facts and such, that has come into my umbrella as of late. And that we are bringing all into one little area so we keep control of it. What happens is now the UL, we can have product come out to market a lot quicker than we did previously.
David, how about Design Lights and Energy Star? Is your department managing those certifications as well?
Yes, Design Lights Consortium, or DLC as everybody knows, is under my umbrella also. The Energy Star has not been brought under my umbrella as of yet. New Jersey is handling that as of right now, but I assume that it will be coming in under my umbrella very soon.
That's good to know. Thank you, David. So, folks, today David and I are going to spend some time with you reviewing what is a lighting layout. We're going to break it down and show you how to read those individual areas of a typical layout, including the luminaire schedule, background objects, calculation zones, statistical zones, power and light density statistics. And before we begin, I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. Typically, our webinars are the last Thursday of every month, and we did push it up 1 week this month, and we appreciate you all following us there. And I also want to tell you that we will be having a special live from Light Fair webinar on the 4th, and that will be 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or noon Vegas time. Not all of us can go to the show. Some of us have to stay back and, keep the business running and get the work done. But it would be wonderful if you could just take a brief half hour to 40 minutes and join us. We will be highlighting some new attractions at the show, as well as sharing with you the Innovative Lighting Awards. So there's several categories in that, and we will be sharing with you who has won those awards, as well as highlights and other special things that are happening at Light Fair. So I hope you can join us. So David, here we have a typical lighting layout. Could you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Yes, we got something that we got over the phone, asked us to do a typical design on 8 by 10 fixture spacing to see if we can achieve anywhere from 35 to 45 foot candle average. Now, this is what we did is we took it into a 2 by 4 fixture is what was requested. We asked if we'd go with 2 by 2. They said, no, they prefer 2 by 4. So we took our EP version, our edgelit version, and created this design on an 8 by 10 spacing, 10-foot ceiling, and the reflectance value of 80, 50, 20. When you do not give us any reflectance values on a project, you let us know what it is. If it's an office, we usually do the standard 80, 50, 20. If it's a warehouse, we'll lower the reflectance values to 50, 50, 10. And if there's racking, we also put all that in. We put the obstructions is what we put in. So with this, there was no other obstructions. It was just a 10-foot height and a 30 by 30 room, and went to see how many foot candles we ended up achieving. So with this, at 2.5 feet above finished floor, we were able to achieve 40-foot candles. This was within the range that the customer was asking for.
So David, once you're giving the customer what he wants here, he's able to understand this type of information typically, or do you generally have to explain what they're looking at?
The majority of the people do understand what a foot candle is. A foot candle is taking a single candle and standing 1 foot away from it. That is what is considered a foot candle. You multiply that by 30, you get 30-foot candles, etc. So on an average, an office, back in the 80s, when everybody was designing these things, they were designing with 4 T12 lamps to get you almost 60 to 70-foot candle average. Nowadays, that's way overlit, and we end up going about 40 to 45-foot candles average for office lighting.
And what is the IES recommendation for typical office lighting?
A typical office lighting is anywhere from 45 to 50-foot candles. Now,
very good.
Now, some cities and counties supersede and put their own in there, and they may be a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but they're always within the realm of the IES recommended practices.
Understood. Thank you, David. Now, David, when I look at this chart that's on the right, I see that the information there we're going to review further in additional slides, but one area I'd like to focus on now, which is where it says LLF at 0.9. Would you mind explaining that a little bit, what the lighting, the luminaire light loss factor is?
Yeah, it's light loss factor is what we take into consideration. Light loss factor takes into consideration when it was a fluorescent fixture or an HID fixture, they take the lamp depreciation, the dirt depreciation, and multiply that together. On a fluorescent fixture, an interior, you're usually about a 0.81 light loss factor. So what happens is that light loss factor is taking into consideration what you're going to be getting, the amount of illumination you're getting down the road, not initially. This is down the road. If you want an initial foot candle, what you're going to get right out of the box, you put the fixtures at 1.0, which is no light loss factor. So that is where it goes from 0.9 is what we're taking for dirt depreciation. LEDs, they depreciate after 70,000 hours, so that's a long length of time. So what we're doing is just putting anywhere from 0.9 to 0.95, depending upon the application itself and what the client is asking for. We have had some LED light loss factor being requested at 0.7 at times. And
so those are very conservative estimates then.
Very, very conservative, and we question why they want to do that, and they say it is a very dirty application. So it's understandable.
Understood. So Emily has asked a question regarding reflectance, and Jason, thank you for piping in there. Reflectance, the bottom line there, David, if you could confirm, is if we had all white floors and white ceilings and white walls, we're going to have a much higher reflectance than if we had, say, black walls and black ceilings and black floors.
Correct. And many times we are not given all the information. We ask for reflectance values, and a lot of times on a form, which is in later slide, has been left blank. So we just go as standard when we're doing it. Like I say, an office lighting, we'll do an 80-50-20. The 80%.
80-50-20 is so if they don't mention it at all, we're going to use the 80-50-20.
Correct, especially on an interior office. On a warehouse, we'll use a different one, which is our standard go-to. But there's also ways that we can figure out what the reflectance value is of a certain surface. It takes a little bit more calculation on our part, but we can get that figured out.
Understood. Thank you, David. So now here we're looking at a warehouse scene, which is a little different than a office-type summary. Now, in this case, David, we're looking at a luminaire schedule that shows us a 0.95 LLF, so it's a little bit less of a luminaire light loss factor in this than the previous fixtures that we're using. Is that right?
That is correct. This was given to us as a light loss factor that the client wanted to use on this project. And what they were looking for was a light assembly area. So if you go through your IES handbook or look it up, light assembly is approximately 30-foot candle average. Okay, so what we did is we put in our fixture spaced out, and we ended up at 29.83 foot candle average. You know, that's a little fudge factor. You're not going to notice 0.2 of a foot candle difference from 29.8 to 30-foot candles.
Right. And this typical warehouse application we're looking at here, I see a scale of 0 to 100 on the X and the Y. Can you tell us what that is?
That is the length and width of this project, so it's a 100 by 100 area that we were taking into consideration, and the fixtures were mounted at 25 foot above finished floor. Now, this being a high bay fixture, we like to go anywhere from 1 to 2 foot below the ceiling. So the ceiling was approximately 27 foot. You know, you're not putting the fixture right up against the ceiling. Plus, also,
sure,
there's a little more airflow coming out between the fixture and the ceiling itself.
And I know that we like that, particularly with LED light sources, and we have a big concern of that in warehouse applications, so that's smart to keep it off the ceiling. Now, David, the work plane here, is that the floor, or is that a couple of feet off the floor? How is that determined?
Work plane at 2.5 feet above finished floor. Okay, so that's 2 foot 6 inches. Majority of the time, it is 2 foot 6 inches off the finished floor where we take our illumination level. Sometimes we ask for tasks at 3 foot above finished floor.
Or desk height, if that is applicable, something like that.
Exactly. You get the different ones that people would like. Majority of the time, being in this business almost 30 years, majority of it has been 2.5 feet. I've just recently been finding out that some people in the East like to have it at 3 foot above finished floor. So there's different parts of the country that like different areas, but IES says 2.5 feet, and we go from there. Now, people have asked for that we have it at the floor level, especially if you're doing emergency egress lighting. You want to take that at the floor. If you're going through an office on an emergency situation, even if there's smoke or whatever, you're on the floor, you want to have light down there. So this is where we take it all the way down to the floor. And
I understand. Now, this information is generally given to you by the client who's asking for the layout. And they're going to give you the work plane height off the floor or maybe at the floor, whatever they're looking for. They're going to give you the dimensions of the building. They're going to also give you the reflectance values that we discussed.
Right.
What other information do you require from the requester?
What we would like to have is a lot of information, and it'll be on the form in the back, a few more slides back, is that we like to know the project name and location, where it's coming from, and who we're dealing with, especially if we get a phone number. If our rep is sending it in from a client, hopefully we can get the client's name and contact them just in case, because the rep sometimes is just the middleman, and he's taking a look at it before he forwards on to us. But we need all that information, also the fixtures you're looking for, and any illumination levels that are desired.
Right, so certainly which fixtures they're looking to use is going to be a primary piece of information.
Correct.
Now, once you've done the layout, often the entire job can be one fixture, for instance, in a warehouse, but sometimes a job might be several different fixtures. Can you explain to us how that affects your business and a little bit affects how you go about doing your layouts and a little bit about what the luminaire schedule tells us?
Yes, well, the luminaire schedule, as you see on the slide right now, there are a quantity on the first one, a quantity of 72 of our MLFP 24 EP 4541. That is a 2x4 edge-lit panel, 41K, which is mounted at 10 feet above finished floor. So these are maybe in a big open office area like a bullpen where you have lots of cubicles. That's usually where we use a 2x4. The next fixture of 60, our MLFP 22 EP 3641, is the 2x2 version of the edge-lit panel. Now a lot of that one would be maybe in a restroom, could be, or smaller offices, little kitchen areas that we would end up using these products in. So it's different areas that you take into consideration. What's the best application for a fixture, and will it get lost in the ceiling or not? And then the third one is 12 of the RR62640W, which is our 6-inch recessed fixture, and that is more than likely on the side, maybe even down the hallway is where we put these fixtures, just spaced them out. And they'll have different criteria for the hallway. The hallway is going to be about 20-foot candles average, just to get a path for walking through. But that shows you the different fixtures that we've used in this project.
So when we look at that layout in this project, we're going to see 3 different symbols, which would represent the 3 different fixtures that you've just described, and where they lie on that layout.
Yes.
That's an excellent explanation. Thank you, David. Now, David, one of the things, sometimes we're doing large layouts, maybe parking lots and whole properties, and when I look at these, some of the layouts that you have issued are very, very detailed. When I squeeze them down just to fit on my screen, it's hardly even legible. There's so much data. So when you blow it up, I see all kinds of information. Like for outdoors, there might be areas where there's islands with trees, parking spots, borders with their neighbors and the like. How do you go about adding all of this information into the computer?
Well, a lot of that is taking as obstructions. If you see, there are buildings within this parking area. There are buildings that are left and the right of parking stalls or drive lanes, etc. Those we have to put in, and we a lot of times assume a 30-foot height unless we're told otherwise for a lot of these buildings to make obstructions, because we know light does not bend. It goes in one direction, so that we will not be able to put light directly through a building, we are able to obstruct that light. And we do give it a reflectance maybe of 10% to bounce back off the building towards the parking lot or the drive lane. And any palm trees or any other trees, we can put these in as obstructions, but a lot of times they're not considered because you got different times of the year where you got full tree and then you got a tree where everything's all bare. So that's where we take into consideration all these different avenues.
Now, David, when you have to actually physically draw all of these objects versus an AutoCAD imported file that might come from a customer, give us an indication of the time difference it takes for you.
Well, if we have to redraw, say, something like this from scratch, we are not AutoCAD people. We're not AutoCAD jockeys. This would take about 6 to 8 hours for us to draw, but it would not be to this detail. What we do is we would take it and make the parking lanes, etc., on it, not do every parking stall. We cannot give you that much of a detail. Well, if you do
if they want this type of detail, they'll have to supply a CAD file. Is that correct?
Correct. AutoCAD or even a PDF, a very clean PDF file. The PDF can be converted with the software that we have into a DXF and then brought into our lighting software. A lot of times if the PDF is not clean, there's a lot of pixelation or a lot of white noise is what I call it, and this takes a lot of time for us to go ahead and clean up the drawing itself.
David, I've been working with you for a couple of years now, and I have made some observations, including one that when they have the CAD file, their drawings are much more accurate and clean and very presentable. When we have to draw it out, there's a lot of detail missing, and it takes much longer. So I would urge those folks out there who are looking to have layouts done, either through MaxLite and David's department or with others, to try to get those CAD files of the property, of the area, of the warehouse, whatever it is that you want to do that layout for. It's going to be a cleaner, easier to read layout, and it's going to be more accurate.
PDF, when we convert it, it does not come out in scale. We have to rescale it as accurate as we possibly can. They do not always come out the best way as what Greg was mentioning, as an AutoCAD would come out as accurate. So we may be off 1 or 2 feet, but we come in and scale it as close as we possibly can. So if you do have a PDF that we need to scale, please give us some type of dimension. Any drawing or PDF that has a dimension, that is something we can work off of. Otherwise, if there's no dimensions and it just says scale 1 inch equals 20 feet, and there's no physical drawing line saying 20 feet long, we have to go in and figure out a door opening or a parking stall, a door opening being 3 feet wide. So we have to measure from that. So with that small area is what we have to scale. It could be off just a hair for that small bit, and it throws the whole drawing off where we may end up with an extra fixture or not. So by all means, please get us as much detail as possible. That helps out.
Great point. So when I recall, there was a time where you were actually using Google Earth to measure the distance between poles. That's not something we'll do anymore. This information must come from the customer these days. Is that right?
No, we are still doing that. You'd be surprised of how many projects that do not have drawings, or the drawing is so old that we cannot use it from our standpoint. So we do ask, like I say, for locations. This way we'd go on Google Earth. We've done ball fields like that where there's no drawings, and we've taken into consideration what everything is involved. There's car dealerships the same way, but sometimes we are able to go on Google Earth and find that, hey, there was a fixture here. How come it's not on this drawing? Then we go back and forth with the client to figure out which is the most updated, either the drawing or Google Earth photo.
Yeah, so folks, the takeaway for this slide is the more information you send, the more accurate your layout is going to be at the end. So calculation zones, these are the regions where, well, David, if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about what calculation zones are and how they impact the end result?
Okay, calculation zones, or we could have them as statistical zones. You could do an overall entire project with one calculation area. You say a big...
Like a warehouse, for instance.
Or site, yes. And then you can break it down into different calculation or statistical zones by way of, say, in a warehouse, as you were explaining, you have the assembly area. You have one area where you have a statistical zone there. You have general warehouse where you just boxes, etc. Then you have shipping and receiving. So you have 3 different areas where you can take and bring up your illumination level, say, in shipping and receiving area. Assembly area is a little bit higher also. Warehouse, general warehouse has to be as high. So you have the three different areas, but then you have the one overall area. So that's how you take your statistical zones and you square them off, round them off, or what have you in the different areas.
Very good. Thank you for clearing that up. Now, statistical zones is, as you mentioned, a specific zone where there's a focus. And I have noticed that these days they're asking more and more about the minimum, the maximum, and the min-to-max ratio, and the average to minimum ratio. Can you share with us a little bit about why that's important to the user?
Well, not only important to the user, but important to the city, county, townships, what have you,
right.
Whoever you have to send your lighting layout to, your design for. You have to meet certain criteria, certain locations.
So is that a code that's national, or is there local codes for such things?
Well, there's national code, which is IES, and then there's local codes, which cities, townships will take into consideration. For instance, we'll say path of egress for emergency. In LA area or even the state of California, they're requiring 1 foot candle minimum for a path of egress. Now, the rest of the nation follows 1 foot candle average. So there's a difference. Average being the entire area, you multiply that, and you get an average of 1 foot candle. Where in California, the lowest point any place within that path is 1 foot candle or above.
And how does that affect the min to max ratio?
Well, the max to min ratio is the highest point that you take, which is underneath the light fixture more than likely, to the lowest point. That's where you divide your maximum divided by your minimum. That's the ratio that you end up getting.
So that's kind of like the hot and cold spots.
Correct. And a lot of times we will identify those by the hot being the red spot on the drawing and the blue being the cold spot on the drawing. So you can see where your hot and cold are. And majority of the time the cold spot is usually in a corner or at the just off the edge of the drawing itself.
Very good. Now, power density statistics, this has become a big focus, particularly since the federal incentives, tax incentives. Can you tell us a little bit about that, David?
Yes, incentives or rebates depend upon your area. Some give rebates on the product. So back east and the central part of the country, a lot of them depend upon rebates for fixtures. Now, if these fixtures are on the Design Lights Consortium list, QPL, qualified product list, the utilities will give you a rebate for the fixture itself, knowing that you're going to be installing it and then reducing your output on your energy. But with Southern California Edison, does not necessarily give you a rebate on the product. They'll give you a rebate on the power you're using. So the power, if you reduce your power by a certain amount, they will give you rebates on that amount that you have reduced your energy consumption.
Now, is that based on fixture to fixture, or is that based on, say, watts per square foot?
So a lot of it is on watts per square foot that you're taking into consideration. Now, when you're doing it from energy consumption, they also have to take consideration your HVAC usage, etc. But once you're starting into LEDs, your HVAC usage usually goes down also because you're not heating,
right.
You're not cooling down the plenum area.
So I've heard that the ESRA law, or a federal tax incentive law, is pushing the density down to below 0.75 watts per square foot in order to take advantage of some of those federal tax laws. So how do we calculate how many watts per square foot we're looking at in a particular area or zone?
You take into consideration, say maybe we had that warehouse or that office. That was a 100 by 100 warehouse or a 30 by 30 office. What you do is you figure out the area for that project, and then you figure out how many luminaires you've used, and it gives you the total watts. Then you take all that into consideration, and it gives you your power density that you're using. So it came out to 0.61 watts a square foot out of taking the 715 watts divided by the area. But that's 0.61. I just went to a Title 24 meeting the other night, and there's some areas that are going into 0.5, even a 0.3 watts per square foot.
Wow.
So it's just going down, down, down. Energy consumption in California is the tightest any place. So once California passes things, the rest of the nation usually follows suit later on.
That's my experience as well. So my understanding of this is that there are experts who are looking at what the absolute minimum watts per square foot can be. And as you mentioned earlier, we've come from 4-lamp T12s where it was just extraordinarily high, overlit applications. We really weren't looking at the cost of energy back in those days. So now that we're focused on it, the government is putting tax incentives to get us down to, in some cases, 0.75, in the case of California, even as low as 0.5 watts per square foot. To calculate this type of information without a layout, is it even possible?
Well, if you take into consideration how many fixtures you're using in the watts and your area, yes, you could figure it out, but that takes a lot of individual walking around for a whole project. You have to do a complete job walk. You don't know everything that's involved in this project. You know, it takes a while without a lighting layout, but it can be done. A lighting layout is your quickest way to get through all this.
So more than just knowing our foot candles, this can have positive values in many ways.
Correct.
So we talked about it as power per square foot. Let's take a look at it as a lighting as opposed to energy power. In other words, instead of looking at watts per square foot, we sometimes are looking at lumens per square foot. It's basically the same formulas, and in this example, they're both bringing us to a 0.67 watts per square foot as well.
Correct.
So lighting density would be more the lumens per square foot, and the power density would be the watts per square foot?
Well, it's pretty much the same. Power density, as it is called in AGI 32. They do a lighting power density, LPD. So it takes into consideration the fixtures, the amount of power used out of there, and the watt, which is, power of the watt's the same thing. And you divide that by the area, that's how you get your power density or watts per square foot.
Thank you, David. So you mentioned the software that you use. There are several out there, aren't there? So one could expect, an end user could expect that one lighting layout could have a different look to it than the next, depending on the software that the layout person is using.
Correct. There are many lighting software programs out there. A lot come from the manufacturers. We use independent lighting software, AGI 32, which the majority of people do use all the way through instead of using something that's skewed more toward certain manufacturer. So in order for us to use this, we have to supply our own IES files. And if you're using certain manufacturer's lighting software, their IES files are added into this program, so they're
Understood.
Already there.
So here is where one has to approach you to get a layout done. This is a basic fundamental form where they can give you some basic information so that you can get the layout started. If you don't mind, I'll just run through it for our listeners. Obviously, we need the client's name, the date, the contact information. Let's give the project a name for references, and, of course, where is the location. How many rooms, or as we called them earlier, how many different designated areas are there and the dimensions of those rooms, the fixtures that we'd like to use in those rooms, and the reflectances, as we mentioned earlier, that we want to use in those rooms. And then also any comments or notes that might be helpful to David and his team. With this form, we can get started. Depending on the complexity of the job, there might be some back and forth Q&A between David's team and the person who's supplying the information. David, typically, from once you get this completed form to when you're shooting back the layout to the requester and the sales department, generally how long is that?
Our typical turnaround time right now is 1 to 3 days. It's not only myself doing this, but Clark Korn, who has also joined the company at the beginning of the year. So there are now 2 of us doing lighting layout, and this has, with the projects coming out so much larger, this has helped out with 2 people now working on it instead of 1 where it was almost a complete week to get a turnaround time when things got busy. So we are able to handle a 1 to 3 day turnaround time, depending upon if we get all the information right up front or how long it's going to take for us to go back and forth. They may delay it another day or 2.
Sure. So assuming you have all the information, 3 days or so.
Correct.
Now, Dan from Chatham asked a great question. Let's suppose that we have an application where it's 50% MaxLite. They're going to use, say, MaxLite on the ceilings, but they're going to use a different manufacturer for maybe walls or something like that, or maybe MaxLite in the general area and a competitor in the different individual offices. Would we still do that layout?
My first inkling is to say no, but Dan, we will take it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, this is the first time that's actually come up. I don't think anyone's ever asked us to do a layout that included competitors' information.
It has, and like I say, it's usually a case-by-case basis. I will get our salespeople involved in it. We will have a discussion to see how much is MaxLite and how much is a competitor. Now, with that being said, we would have to have, our client would have to supply us with all the competitor information. We do not.
Yeah, all the IES files and the like, of course.
Yeah, we do not go out and search for it.
Now, we're coming to close to the end, and before, and people start running when we get close to the end. So could you just spend 1 minute to explain what an IES file is so that everyone has an understanding?
IES file is raw candle power taken from what is called an LM79 photometric report. An LM79 is an absolute file test that a NavLab certified testing laboratory conducts and tests our fixtures to. They will give us the complete output of the fixture and all the information we need, our efficacy, the CCT values, etc. out of it. And
that's all rolled into a single file that's called an IES file?
IES file. Now, if somebody asks for an IES file, and then a lot of times we get that, and they say, well, I can't read it. It's all just numbers. That's all it is raw candle power. Well, we ask them then, what do you need? Do you need a template to show you how the spread is? So there's a conversation that goes back and forth, but yet we end up giving them a template majority of the time. A template is giving a fixture a certain height and then gives it the spread and has ISO lines, which is rings of foot candles, showing how the spread would go.
I've had a few salesmen who would say, I just downloaded your IES file and my computer won't open it. So that tells me that I'm dealing with somebody who doesn't really understand what an IES file is.
Correct.
So, folks, in order to plug in and give us all these foot candle readings point for point that David and his team provide for you, the IES file has to be generated for the individual fixtures that they're using in that layout. MaxLite, so you know, FYI, has all of our IES files available for download to the public. So any of you who do your own layouts, and I know that there are a lot of distribution agencies, rep agencies who do their own layouts, feel free to download our IES files and use them as needed. Folks, I mentioned on the onset that we do have a live from Light Fair webinar for June 4th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time or noon Vegas time. I hope you all can join us. David, will you be at Light Fair?
Yes, me and my team will be there on day 1 and day 2. Come by the booth, say hi, introduce yourself, and if you have a project, we can always discuss it there.
Fantastic. Folks, as you know, we do have the university.maxlite.com where you can earn your lighting degree. We just had our valedictorian. This is a gentleman who happens to work for MaxLite. He is a new hire in customer service. All of MaxLite employees have to earn their lighting degree, all 3 courses. And this particular gentleman, his name is Claude, went through all 3 courses in less than 5 hours. That's a record. He did it in less than half the time that anyone else has done it, and he did it with an over 90% grade average. So kudos to Claude, and any of you who have colleagues who can use a brush-up or refresher or an introduction to the lighting industry, the Earn Your Lighting degree at university.maxlite.com is completely commercial-free and is pure about the lighting. Wanted to mention also that we can do custom training for you, whether they be about lighting layouts, about MaxLite product, about LED technology in general. If you have an audience who needs an education, let us know. We'd be happy to entertain it and put together a presentation just for your audience. I also want to mention very quickly about our rebate service. You know, David, we talked a little bit with Dan about could we do a layout that included competitors' products. David answered that question. When it comes to rebate services, we will complete the paperwork for your utility rebates requirements, even if it has competitive products in it. We only ask that MaxLite be at least 50% of the products for that job, and we will do all the utility rebate paperwork for you. Folks, before you leave, I urge you, please take our poll. We love to know the numbers that we have, how many people are viewing. Management pays a great deal to keep these webinars coming, and we want to show them that it's worth their while. Folks, I can't thank you enough for spending your time with us the last hour or so. I hope this time was valuable for you. David, thank you so much for your time and attention in helping us out. We will be sending a copy of this presentation to everyone who has joined today. Again, thank you so much. Please do join the poll before you leave. Have a great rest of the day.